Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started.
Okay, so Bethany, I know what we're going to talk about today for two different reasons. Can I tell you why? Can I jump in?
Please do.
Okay, so you had a project for myself and yourself and your team to kind of we're going to work on. So sneak peek, if I'm allowed to say, or
Yes.
teaser or whatever. We're trying to create like different tracks, if you will, for our listeners. It's what people have been asking us for, and we've just been a little slow. So thank you guys for your patience, but people have been asking us to kind of like, hey, like now we've got a significant amount of episodes.
Yeah.
And so if there's particular topics, we're like, oh, go find this episode. And they're like, which one? And so we're now trying to organize ourselves so that we can go, this is the, 5 episodes you want to listen to if you're trying to, coach your team or your, what do you call it? Your office manager. And then these are the 5 you want to listen to for responding to negative patients. And this is what, right? So we're still working on that, but, what we discovered recently, I'm not sure if you're aware or not yet, but when I was looking at what we have for associates, it's we realized like we have a lot of really good information packed into several episodes, but it's been a little while since we've done a more recent one.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start with that. And again, for our subscribers, like just keep hanging on. We will have those tracks designated here shortly.
Yes.
I promise.
It's in the works.
But speaking of associates, I think it's also on my mind because we're in the middle of looking for an associate, which is why I was kind of going back and I was like, oh, I'll take that topic for us digging through. And so I don't think we've updated in a while. And the fact that you and I are like literally in the thick of it, I think we have some pearls that we could talk through
For sure.
As we're going through this.
Super relevant topic right now, especially for us, but also knowing that we haven't talked about it in a while. So I think it's time for it to resurface again. So yeah, do you want to tell listeners
why I'm looking for an associate? Okay. Okay, I should have thought about that. What do I want to say? So I've got my current associate who might be, most likely this year, is going to head out and do his own venture. And so we're now trying to go, okay, if and when he's ready to step out, I don't want to be left in a gap of where I'm now having to try to manage, all these patients and all these days. So we were like, at the end of the year, last year, we were talking about goals and differences for the next year. And I know for me, when I mentioned, like, one of the things that was kind of in the back of my mind weighing on me was going, I know my current associate's not going to leave me high and dry, but he's got to do his thing. And if that happens to be 60 days that he needs, and then he's bought a practice or whatever he's doing, like, he doesn't know his timeline, but we don't know what opportunities are going to present themselves for him. So, I don't want to be caught off guard and unprepared. So what are we doing? And you were like, I'm 10 steps ahead of you. I think we need to start the search now. And so I feel like that's where you kind of coming in and guiding me through that, because my brain was all over the place and I had a ton of anxiety about it. And I think this is also relevant. So for somebody else who's not in this same boat, obviously, but who has been thinking a while now, like, I may need an associate, because I know you get that asked a lot.
Yeah.
How do you find good associates?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can name drop. I guess you could edit me out if I can't do this, but since he's been a guest on the podcast, I'm gonna take the liberty to throw out his name. But Dr. Ludlow, who talked to us about his office manager model and all of that, his name came up because randomly, like, his town is not close to my town.
Yeah,
like, what,
right.
It's about an hour?
Yeah, probably about an hour. Mm-hmm.
And randomly, we had patients that the girls were, like, now older teens, 16, 18. And we'd been trying, they had lived in my town, they moved to his town, and for the last like year or 2 years, we're like, well, why don't you find a dentist closer to you? Like these aren't like pediatric patients anymore, all permanent tooth needs. And the mom still is like, well, we've been coming here, which I so appreciate. And I think it's, you know, makes me happy on one side, but we finally reached a point where I was like, I don't do these procedures. And we were referring to Ludlow's practice, which we don't, you know, we rarely get to do. It's like random. And so, you know, I kind of said, well, if you don't get to see Ludlow himself, he's got a good practice though. Anyway, so I mentioned to you going, hey, you know, it's so funny, Ludlow's name came up and I got to refer to him and that was so much fun for me. And I was like, you know, I don't know about the associates. And you were like, his associates are all phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And I was like, how did he do that? Mm-hmm. And so you kind of, basically it's y'all were very clear about what it is that you wanted and the culture that you wanted and what you were looking for. So I guess, you know, it would not be a bad idea if we could get Ludlow back on to talk about, did he have some in between that didn't work out well, or that what helped him kind of get to the criteria that he was looking for. I think having you helping him, because you know the practice inside and out, which is why I'm tasking you with that for me too. It's like, help me figure out, because I see things from one perspective, but you're gonna look at it from another going, well, yeah, you may say you want this, but looking at this aspect of the practice. So I guess also for people that don't have a Bethany to do that for you. Anyway, all of that could maybe, sorry, Ludlow, I don't know if you're listening, man, but I'm throwing this one at you. I would love to hear how you've kind of got this dream team of associates, because I think there's so many people who have nightmares with their associates. And I think for me, it's also a point of evolution, if you will, because I think my first associate, we knew he would be starting his own practice. I thought I'd get him for 2 years. We got him for 6. This current associate, like young guy, and the sky's the limit. And so I knew going in, we don't know where and how long this is going to last. So we've had him for almost 4 years now. And depending on how the year goes and what he finds, we may have him for 5. So I think for me initially, where I was like, well, why can't I hang on to an associate? And you were the one who had to point out, hey, dum-dum, you've taken on candidates that have told you they're not sticking around long term. Right. Okay. Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. I don't feel like such a failure now. It just, I wasn't like clear about what it is that I wanted. But even me, like if the first associate had come to me and said, year 3 in and going, never mind, I don't want to start my own, I want a partner, I don't think I would have wanted a partner at that point.
Right.
And now I'm like, okay, possibly. And maybe I still kind of, it gives me the heebie-jeebies to think about like having to marry somebody else. But at the same time, I've got to look at where I am in my life right now. And I'm like, I don't want a revolving door of associates. I don't like it anymore. I don't have the energy for it anymore. But I'm still in my journey, right? I still have young kids and aging parents, and they require so much of my time. But there's going to come a point where that's not going to be the same
anymore.
Needs. And so at that point, am I going to resent a partner going, I don't really need you, I want to go back to making my own choices? But is it fair to ask an associate to not want a partner? Like, I don't think that's fair at all. Anyway, all of those thoughts and things, like, I think my point is we're all evolving. So how do we figure out what it is that we're looking for? Because I think that's a key part of it. But then also, what about the literal logistics of how to find somebody? So I think maybe we focus the conversation on that part of it, and then maybe on the how do you make the list of what you want. Maybe I'm going to task Ludlow with that one. Okay.
I think that'd be a great thing for him to jump in on, because I think you're right. So much of it is knowing about what you want, not just from, are we looking at partnership? Are we looking at long-term associate? Those are kind of the big picture ideas, but even down to how much do I want them working? What type of procedures do I want them taking on? How are we going to split up the patient base? What does that look like? Because there's a certain personality type that you got to have that can grow their own patient base. And then there's a certain personality type that you're looking for that's just willing to kind of share the patient base. When you're sharing the patient base, there's a lot of clinical like-mindedness that has to be there in order for that to work long term. And so I feel like half the battle is knowing what you want. Then you parlay over into the whole culture side of things and what type of personality is going to fit well on our team. What's really top priority? Is it, which sounds weird to even say this, but like if you had to pick the order of qualities that are most important, a Ludlow, for example, is so heavy on the patient experience and having these really fantastic conversations with patients and this genuine care that he wants all of his associates to have, that is first and foremost. We can figure out some of the clinical nuances that might be different or that we might disagree on, but ultimately the patient care is top priority, and the level of communication. So it's like, is that top priority for Dr. Smith that might be looking for an associate, or are there going to be things that drive him or her more crazy if this person doesn't have it? So much of it is just thinking about what you want, which is hard for the first associate. I'll say that when you're talking about things like this, it's almost like when you build a house, you're like, oh, I want it to look like this. I want the bathroom to be here, the kitchen to be here, the outlets to be here. And then you live in it and you're like, oh, shoot, I would have done this different or that different. It's very similar to your first associate. You're like, oh, in my mind, this is what I want them to do. And then they come on board and you're like, I guess I didn't realize that I didn't want that. And so it is hard for the first associate. And then once you've lived with an associate for a while, you have a little bit of a clearer idea of what you want, which is where you're at. Because after having 2 long-term associates, you're at a different phase of life, and you have more clarity now on what you want and don't want in an associate, which is helpful, I think, in this hiring process.
I think absolutely, because there's no way I would have known. And again, my needs have changed as well. So I think it's interesting to look back on it. And I think the other thing, like for a lot of people, I think there's the fear of, am I going to get stuck with the wrong person?
Yeah.
So are your expectations realistic, I guess is what I would say or ask. I think the other thing is a lot of people that are like, oh, I was burned by this, and then the non-compete and all that. So getting caught up in those nitty-gritty things, not that they're not important, but I think for me, the philosophy of it's got to be a win-win. And I think that's where a lot of times I feel like the person looking for the associate really wants something that's not deliverable.
Yeah.
And my comment is, would you want that? Like, would you sign up and go as an associate if somebody offered you that?
Right.
If the answer to that's no, then why are you trying to make somebody else do that? I think we go back to, again, like, can I afford one? Will my patients see one? All of that. So we have a lot we could talk about with this. But before we get into all of that, I think just, so let's forward to here we are. So for me, here I am going, and luckily, again, my current associate, he's so respectful with that, where he's like, I'm not going to leave you high and dry. I'm not going to call you and be like, I'm not coming back next week. Mm-hmm. And so I do have some time to search for the right person. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So I think that's where I can kind of go, okay, well, maybe I can be a little more picky now because I have the time and I've got more, experience, I guess, in kind of knowing what it is that I want, that we can kind of go, okay, how are we going to find said person? But can we start there and maybe kind of make the focus of the rest of this podcast that, and then maybe we come back and do another one if we need to dive more into all of that. So once we decided that, yes, it might take me a while because I am going to be more discerning now about what it is that I want, we said, let's go ahead and start. So then when I was like, where do I even start, Bethany?
So to me, the first step is figuring out how you're going to market the position, no matter what demographic you're in, because we're in a pretty big metroplex that your office is kind of in the center of that metroplex, more or less, really close to the airport. It's a good centralized location. So even knowing that you've got a great big metroplex to draw from, I always recommend being overly aggressive on the marketing, because I would much rather you have a big pool of candidates to pick from than, oh, I'm going to market on this one platform and let's hope the right person comes through there. To me, I'm like, the question I always have in my mind is, did we miss the right candidate because we didn't put the post on the right platform?
We didn't cast a wide enough net.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's worked really well for your current position that you're in. We've got a ton of amazing candidates. So I recommend kind of a multi-platform approach. Number one, in Texas, we have a platform called Dental Post. It's, I say in Texas, it's really big in some of the metropolitan areas. So like the DFW Metroplex, the Houston area, Austin area, the candidates are very familiar with Dental Post. Now, in other states, there may not be a quote unquote dental post, but my guess is there's something similar that's a regional type thing. So in your particular case, we did.
I thought Dental Post was around the country.
So it has pockets of popularity in other parts of the country, but like right now we're doing an associate search out in El Paso, Texas, which is a huge city. It really is huge, but they don't have a big footprint out there. Dental Post doesn't. Okay. So it just depends on certain areas. So you can certainly look into it, and Dental Post will tell you, like, unfortunately, after you purchase the post, they'll say, hey, by the way, we don't have a huge footprint in this area. But still, it's visibility that I think is...
Well, it's not cost prohibitive. It is a very reasonable cost to pay for just to see what does come through.
To me, it's worth it.
It's worth it, and I've often found it much easier to navigate than, say, like Indeed.
Yeah. It is a super user-friendly platform, and I think they have done a couple price increases, but I think it's like $199 for 30 days. It's relatively inexpensive. So that to me is a good platform. The other thing that we do is either a Texas or state sponsored job board or a national job board, sometimes both. So in Texas, it is the TAPD, and then, of course, nationally is the AAPD for pediatric dentistry. Right now, again, like I was saying, for our El Paso client, it's a general dentist, and so we chose the ADA job board. We chose the ADA job board over the TDA job board because just looking at the history of our TDA post, we realized there wasn't a lot of good traction on our TDA post. You could certainly do both, but in this particular case, the numbers were so discriminate that we were like, okay, we're going to put our money into the ADA basket. And that tends to get a lot of visibility. With the ADA, you have different options. It's similar to the AAPD. There's kind of your basic post. There's more of a premium post where they're putting it on newsletters and things like that. So you might have some options when it comes to your either going nationally or going state board sponsored job post. But to me, you have to do that. So don't do Dental Post and not that. Do Dental Post and that, in my opinion. And it doesn't mean that you have to do both the state and the national. You can pick one of them. Beyond that, Indeed. So,
sorry, can I interrupt there?
Yeah.
So, would one of the drawbacks of doing the ADA versus TDA, the whole licensing thing?
It is. So, most of the time, you're not going to get an applicant that's not in the works or planning to move to the Texas area. So we did nationally on your job post. We were just looking at a resume from a lady in Michigan. And so it's like, you're going to get people from different states, but most of the time, at least when I've talked to people from different states for you, they are already in the process of getting Texas licensure. Okay. They already have Texas licensure because they used to live here. Something along the lines of that.
I will say I'm remembering now when we, 2 months ago or so, we talked about like, okay, what are we doing here? And Bethany helped me because I have no idea what to do. And I think you left me a voicemail maybe or an email. And my first thought when you guys said, we could do TAPD or do AAPD, and my first thought was, well, I'm going to do TAPD because I want somebody, like that's licensed in Texas, and it just seems like, Texas is a big state, so we probably would have a big enough draw. And AAPD just seems like, could people come out of the woodworks and I just not know who these, it's just so many. And then y'all were like opposite. You were like, we would recommend, do whichever one you want. We would recommend AAPD, so you're whatever. I was like, oh, of course I would think the opposite. Like, okay, let's do what you're recommending. And you're right, it has worked out well. The other thing I do want to ask you, because you said we've had a lot of applicants, and I want to set the expectation right for people, because your version of a lot and to me a lot were two different things, right? Like, so it's almost like when we post for an RDA, and back in the day when you'd get like 50, and now you get, I don't know, maybe 20, or maybe, and so it depends on your definition of what's a lot. Not that it matters here nor there, but I think for me, if you were to be like a lot, and I'm like, okay, so we've had what, like 50 or 60, Dennis? And you're like, no, dummy, we've had 8. And I'm like, oh, 8? I thought that was less. You're like, well, the average is 2. Okay. Like, I just had no idea.
Yeah.
So can you kind of walk us through, like, just to know?
So glad you're saying that. So, yes, expectations are going to be really important here, because, first of all, it also depends upon your demographic and where you are. So we were talking about state lines. It's interesting because Texas is so huge. We don't often think about these geographically small states. So I've got a client out in Delaware, and Delaware, when you're out there, is so close to 2 states, actually 3 states, that it's like licensing really is an issue there, because there could be a dentist or a hygienist, in this particular case is what he's looking for, that literally lives 20 minutes from the office, but that 20 minutes from the office is in a different state. So then do they have a Delaware license, and can they, practice dentistry or practice hygiene? So we have to consider state lines and licensures. For Texas, it's less of an issue, but in a lot of areas of the world, especially on the East Coast, it is very much a issue that we have to think about. And in those small...
That sounds like a nightmare.
I know, right? Aren't you so glad to live in Texas? I mean,
yeah.
So even in those smaller states, looking for an associate, knowing you've got state line issues, you really might have 1 or 2 candidates that you're looking at, and that's it, because it is a small pool that you're drawing from. Now, in Texas, we tend to expect a bigger pool of candidates because it's such a huge state, that my goal when we started launching all of your associate posts was I was really hoping to have 5 really good, like not really good, 5 total applicants. And then out of that, I thought that we could probably find the one for you. And if not, we were fully prepared to keep running this as long as it needed to run to find the right person. So I think from an applicant standpoint, we might be up to 12 or 13 for you now, which is blowing my mind because that is far beyond what I expected. And those applications are still coming in. Like, we've had job posts up now for, I guess, almost, not quite 2 months. And so we're still almost 2 months in, and we had 2 new applicants come in this last week, which
so then can I distract us one more time here and go, what about timing? Because part of me went, should we not post now because people are going to be graduating come May, June, so when do they start looking? Actually, maybe they do start looking in January. Actually, do I want a new grad? Maybe I don't. Like all of those things. But is that going to be the timing of where I'm going to get more bang for my buck? Because if I post in January, but nobody's yet looking. So all of those things kind of went through my mind, and that's where I'm just like, I don't know, man. Just whatever Bethany says to do, just do it, and we'll be good. And now, because I think we did dental post, which is a 30-day, and then we did AAPD, I think, right? Those are the only 2 we did, or maybe Indeed,
and
too?
we did Indeed.
And so the AAPD one was, you could pick 30, 60, 90 days, whatever the options were, and we did 60, and I literally just said to you recently, like, thank goodness we only did 60, because I don't want to keep looking when we've found the person that we're looking for. And so we're going to finish looking at the candidates that are still coming through just in case, because the one that we're looking at, I mean, there's still so much that needs to happen in terms of us checking each other out.
Yes.
Like on paper, we line up. Now it's like, let's watch each other work. How do you treatment plan? What do you want? What compensation are you expecting? What days do you want to work? Can I make that happen? Like, there's so much.
So much.
Which is why I'm like, this is where people don't want to do this. It's like, it's your baby already. And then there's all of these logistics under the sun. So I think that's kind of where the point of this podcast for me was like, I would have been lost without you. How are people doing it? So maybe we could create like a resource for these are your steps and this is what you're asking and whatever.
Absolutely.
That we could make maybe in our next digest that we do for our subscribers.
I think that would be a super helpful component, because the March digest, to me, March is a fantastic time to look for an associate because of graduation. So most programs finish up somewhere in May, June, July. And then we've got a fresh batch of associates that are on the market, so to speak. So March is a fantastic time. Most of them are slowing down in their clinicals by that point and are starting to actually look for jobs. They're getting out ahead of it. So March digest will...
But what about the ones that don't want... They're like, I'm not going to handle a newbie. I don't want that.
So that, to me, any time of the year. Honestly, the only reason that we would look at a March time frame would be for new grads. But the rest of the anybody that's already licensed, already doing dentistry, there is no prime time. I would say the only slower times can sometimes be like that November, December period of time, because everybody is not thinking about changing careers at that point. They're thinking about holiday, Christmas, their plans for the end of the year. So that is the only time that can be historically a little bit low for hiring across the board, whether it's associate or team members. That's a low period of time. Yeah. But other than that, the rest of the time. Now, I would say give yourself a long enough runway. Is when you think about a timing standpoint, if you're looking to add on an associate within the next 6 months or in about 6 months, I would much rather have a longer runway than a shorter runway. So I normally recommend starting the search about 6 months in advance. Now, if you're in a market that you know there's always dentists looking for jobs, and you just, word on the street is there's a lot of people that be prepared for a lot of associate applications, then I would say you could shorten your runway a little bit. But even if you find somebody that's currently contracted with somebody else, there's usually a 90-day period of time that they have to give notice to get out of their contract. So let's say you interviewed people for a couple months, you found your person, they've got to give 90-day notice. That was still a 5-month timeline. So to me, 6 months is usually the right time frame. With you, we started a little bit earlier than that because I was uncertain of what the application process would look like. I didn't know if we would get a lot of applicants, just a few. I knew we were looking for a very particular type of person. So I knew we might have to go through several rounds of job posts to get to the right person. And so with you, we started a little bit earlier in the process.
And I think it's that, and also the same thing of like, we don't know what our deadline is for as far as if my current associate finds a practice tomorrow to purchase, then I don't want to just be sitting there going, humbadoo.
Yep.
You know, I'm just waiting on him to tell me. Like,
we wanted to be out ahead of it and have you covered. So we mentioned, obviously, Dental Post, ADA.
I cut you off at Indeed.
And Indeed is the other one that I would say universally, nationally, it's got good exposure. When people are looking into job posts, they are normally frequenting Indeed. It is a more difficult platform to utilize, but you can figure it out. So Indeed, to me, Indeed is one of those that you have to do. It just, to get the right exposure to cast the net wide enough, you got to have Indeed. There's an alternate one in some demographics. Glassdoor is a good alternative to Indeed, or might be used in conjunction with Indeed. But Indeed, anytime we're helping a client hire for any position, it always goes on Indeed. So that's another one. And then I would say what we normally do is we start with Dental Post, usually national, ADA or AAPD, and then Indeed. We see how those perform. Usually we give that a month, sometimes 6 weeks. And then if we need more traction, we go the 2 extra steps, which is social media posts. So we market any post through our social media platforms, but also we like creating little graphics that can go on dental Facebook groups. They can go on the doctor's personal platform. So if they're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, then they can utilize these little graphics to be like, by the way, I'm so glad that my practice is growing. Can't wait to add a fantastic doctor to our team. But if nothing else, even if you're linked in with some of the, like LinkedIn, putting it out on LinkedIn or putting it out on dental Facebook groups that you're connected with, then that's a good way to just get the word out organically. You could use that same little graphic to communicate with your supply rep, because they often have a good idea of the market and who's looking for jobs and all of that. So creating some kind of, I call it a graphic. Sydney on our team is the one that always creates these, they're color themed to go with the practice, and it's just a brief little synopsis. It's a visual, so it's not just words, but it's actually got some color pop to it, and you can populate that out through your organic social network is what I would say. So that's an optional added thing. If you're in a really small demographic and you're going to be fighting to get 2 candidates, then don't even wait on that. Just go ahead and do that as part of your phase 1 marketing. And then contacting the dental schools in your state or in neighboring states. They normally have a really good alumni network, and you send that cute little graphic that you created and say, hey, we're trying to get the word out about this amazing opportunity that we have. And then normally they either have a job board that they will post the job to, or they have some kind of monthly newsletter that goes out where they can add your information to that. So those 2 additional ones, social and dental schools, would be, if you're in a small demographic, go ahead and do those. And if you're in a larger demographic, try the other 3 broad platforms first. If you're not happy with the response that you get, then you can add those 2 additional steps.
Fantastic. I love all that. And I think, I would not have thought of, you're right, your reps are another good, they usually know what the word is on the street.
They've got their ear to the ground, and yep.
So I guess the next question I would ask is, so again, like these resumes come in, and then what?
Yeah. So what's interesting about the associate search is most of the time resumes come in and they're all qualified applicants. Now, if a doctor is like, I absolutely don't want a new grad, then when those come in, those are kind of set aside to go, okay, we'll pursue those if we need to pursue those. So that can be kind of a clear dividing line. But if we're like, we're open to new grads, we're open to people who have been doing dentistry, then honestly, most applicants that come in are qualified. Then we go to some of the same qualities we look for with our assistant search or our business assistant search. What does the job history look like? So we actually, for our El Paso client, we actually have a resume that came in where it's like 1 year at each practice. And so then we start going, okay, we're still going to probably schedule a phone call, an interview with this particular candidate, but we are going to be trying to figure out what's been the reason for the change. Why are you hopping? And honestly, that's really some of the distinguishing things that we look at. We also like to look at some of the additional studies that they've done. So if they're really into, I can think of one resume that came across our plate at one point where it was really looking into like homeopathic treatments for, caries and all of that. And we were looking at a client that we knew that would not jive. And so then it's like, this probably isn't going to be clinically the right fit for this practice. And so we might set that candidate aside. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't end up interviewing them, but we're going to interview all of our first choice candidates based on resume, based on studies and what they've really kind of dug into, we're going to look at those first, and then if need be, we'll get to those. So with an associate, it's hard to eliminate just based off resume, is what I would say.
Well, but it could be, maybe, I would say, because, like, for example, for me, it's something that I wouldn't have thought of initially. I think because of the previous 2 associates I've had, I knew, like, we all trained at the same residency program.
Yeah.
So I know you guys are finishing out of residency, so I know you are qualified and ready to go with special needs patients. You're qualified and ready to go with oral sedation. You're going to be qualified and ready to go with the OR and all of those things. And so I think now looking at it, though, where I'm going, you know what, I don't know that I want a new grad this time, because I don't want, I'm tired now. And I'm not in the office as much now. And I need somebody who can stand their own and be okay with that the days that I'm not there. And a new grad is probably not, even if they're comfortable, I'm probably not comfortable with what they can do and not do. In terms of the customer service piece, I'm sure their dentistry is fine. But anyway, all of that to say, like, now I'm going, oh yeah, are you okay with oral sedation? Because we are, the job requires you to do that. Do you have a level 2 permit in Texas? So for you to come in and not have your sedation permit is not going to be helpful to me.
Exactly.
So we needed to be particular about that. So I would imagine for a general office, it's like, have you done CERAC? Do you know how to use a 3D scanner? Do you do Invisalign? Do you like implants? Like, so not that those are going to be, I guess you need to figure out when you're kind of looking at this candidate going, what is a deal breaker?
Exactly.
In another vein, another thing that came up that I was not thinking about, because why would I guess, but maybe I should have. Looking at, you had mentioned one of the candidates that a resume we got was actually from a colleague of mine, and she said, hey, look at this person, she's moving to Dallas. And so on paper I was like, dude, she's rocking. And then this is my colleague that has recommended, so to me I was like, oh, this person's gonna be a star. Well, you talked to this person, and the candidate was very much like, what are my hours? What are my days? What are my pay? What's my package? And I was like, oh God. And I felt like a crumb, like, oh, because I feel like we are very robust with our team package. That, like, we have a very good, we're very competitive with corporate.
Yeah.
But I hadn't even thought about that. I was like, you're right. Like, all of these corporates that are all over the place can suck them up super quick, because they can offer them a 401k and medical and dental and vision and time off and all this. And I'm like, I'm a small pedo practice, and I can't offer you any of that. And so it was really eye-opening and kind of crushing to me to go, oh God, you suck, but it is what it is. And so it's like, okay, candidate, but what do you want? You were saying the culture matters to you. And a lot of times in corporate, the culture is produce, produce, produce. And maybe you're young and green, and you've got a lot of loans to pay back, and you need to produce. Great. Well, this is not, my practice is not going to be. Now, you're saying the culture matters, and the team and the quality of the staff matters, and the mentoring opportunities matter.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get that and get the full package and all of that. So it's like, you were kind of like, okay, this is a candidate that's just not going to fit in with this practice.
Yeah.
Because she's kind of got unrealistic expectations for...
Well, she wanted both. She wanted, to use the old phrase, she wanted her cake and wanted to eat it too. To me, it was very evident, if the package and all the offerings and all the extras are what are primary of importance to you, and I know they're primary because of how much they're coming up in this conversation compared to other conversations, interviews that I've had at this point where that doesn't come up. We're talking practice, we're talking clinical philosophy, we're talking the team, we're talking what is a day in the life of an associate at the practice looks like. The conversation has geared itself naturally towards that. And in my conversation with you, it has not gone that way. Even if I've tried to make it go that way, we keep coming back to things that I get are important for an associate to ask those questions about, but that is your primary concern. And so it becomes really evident when you have these back-to-back phone conversations. You're like, this is the outlier. And this one is looking for a great environment, according to her, a great culture. That's what's most important. But your questions all center around your financial package. And in that case, you are looking for corporate, because there are there are very few privately owned practices that can compete with the corporate compensation package for associates that includes medical benefits, that includes retirement, that includes paid vacation and things like that. Like, the private practice cannot afford that. And so to me, it is an either or. You're either looking for this great private practice experience, a certain patient experience. You're looking for that direct, partnership relationship with the practicing owner. You're looking for that camaraderie there, or you're looking for an environment where you can drop in, be the dentist, produce, and be able to financially have this compensation package that is commensurate with that. I'm not even going to say unfortunately. It's not unfortunately in my mind. It is two different things that an associate needs to decide what are they looking for. It's either or. It is not at this point, and I don't think it can ever be both and. It cannot be both the corporate package and the private patient experience. They do not coexist. They're two different practices. And so I think it's important for a practice owner to know this is what we're looking for, and for the associate to know.
Well, I think what I really liked about you clarifying that for me, because I had no idea. Like, I felt like a crumb. I'm just like, my practice sucks. I can't offer anything. None of these people, even the ones that when we get to the compensation part, they're not going to want to join my practice. They're going to go to a corporate, and they're going to, and then you had to talk me off the ledge and go, but let them. If that's their primary focus, but that's not who we're looking for, which is why we cast the net early, so that we could find the person that, obviously everybody wants to earn a living, but they have more goals. Like my current associate, when he started with us, he had many job offers in the Metroplex.
Yeah.
He had many people were trying to woo him over, but he ended up going, well, I want private practice experience. And he was smart. He had a day in a Medicaid practice. He had a day in a small town practice. Then he had a day in mine, so that he could kind of figure out what it is that he wanted and what was important to him. But when he came to me, he's like, well, why I'm interested in your practice is because I want you do a lot of things here, procedure-wise, that I would love to learn.
Yeah.
And so for my practice, he wasn't difficult with me about, well, I want to get paid this and I should this and I should that. It was very much like, I want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are out there, but he could have been sucked up by corporate at any time, easily.
Yeah.
And he knew himself well enough to go, that's not really what I want. And so he was doing the same thing. I mean, he could have had any number of corporate jobs, but he was kind of digging deeper and going, wait, I want to find this one experience so that I can get that under my belt. And so same thing, like it's on both sides. The owner and the associate need to both have that same philosophy, and we may just need to look longer and harder.
Exactly, to find the right fit, for sure. Okay, we've got a ton of content still to discuss on this, but I think we need to pause it here and do another episode on this. How do you feel about that?
I agree.
Okay, thanks for chatting with me about it.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.